Hi, everyone. We are really excited to have this panel and to have our panelists here. I would like to welcome you here on behalf of the Fee Center for Indigenous STBBI Research to our conversation on sex work. My name is William Gooding. I'm a mixed race person with Quechua, Spanish, and Anglo-Irish ancestry. I've lived with HIV for 17 years, have worked and volunteered in the sexual health field for close to 30 years. And my pronouns are he and they. I have the privilege of being the national director for the Fee Center and of working with an amazing group of colleagues with the aim of integrating First Nations, Inuit, and Métis methods, knowledges, and ways of being into Indigenous sexual health research. I'm calling in today from the territory where McMaster University is located. The territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum and the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations. That being said, we are excited that the reach of this conversation series is from sea to sea to sea here on Turtle Island, as the Fee Center is a national research center. I'm here today to welcome you to today's timely and important conversation on sex work. Given that we're an Indigenous sexual health research center, we understand the need to highlight the strengths and knowledges of Indigenous peoples, which are central to how sex, sexuality, and our relations with each other are navigated. We understand that in doing sexual health research, certain groups of people often get left behind in research and in the conversations about sexual health, well-being, and community. This conversation brings those who work in the area of sex worker advocacy and support to discuss research, community support, well-being, stigma, and the current state of sex work laws in Canada. This conversation will focus on the need to include the voices of Indigenous sex worker advocates and Indigenous people engaged in sex work in research and advocacy to meet the needs of Indigenous sex workers. As always, please put any questions you have in the chat box. Panelists will have a chance to respond to questions at the end of this conversation. In the context of the conversation series at the Fee Center, we value your participation and support for events such as this, and we welcome you to follow us on our social medias, such as Facebook and Instagram. The Fee Center has a host of resources that are open to the public, and you can find us online at www.feecenter.mcmaster.ca. Our conversations are available both on the Fee Center website and by searching for the Fee Center's YouTube channel. Elder Sheila Nyman will be leading this conversation and will be opening it for us. After that, I will ask everyone to briefly introduce themselves and we will begin the panel. So thank you everyone for being here. And Sheila, if you would be kind enough to open for us, it'd be really amazing.
Absolutely. So I'm going to introduce who I am, my connection, as well as my permissions. And then I'm going to invite you to come with me on a little journey. And then I will tell you more about myself when Dominic, Monica, and Naomi talk about themselves. So my name is Sheila Nyman. I am mixed Syilx from the Okanagan, the Lower Similkameen, so I'm also known as Similkameen. I am a member of the Lower Similkameen Indian Band. I have been with an elder and other elders, but there's one main elder who has put me through the many initiations and guidances and teachings and trainings that go with learning traditional ways. And I have permission to share many teachings, and I have permission to share and do the ceremonies that I do, such as this one where I'm opening for you. It's a very important thing that we are all able to say that we were taught and that we have permission, that there was elders, there was leaders who said yes and stood me up. So I want you to know that. So I right now am on the territory of the Shequamic people in the interior of British Columbia, though my territory is south of here. And because we are coast to coast, sea to sea, and we come from many different directions. I'm going to invite you to come on this journey so that we can all be connected in more ways than through this electronic device. And in so doing that, I'm going to invite you to breathe in deeply through your nose, right into your diaphragm. Your stomach should push out, and breathe that out with your mouth. And wherever you are, you can do this. And if it's comfortable, close your eyes and breathe in again through your nose, thanking the maker of breath for that medicine, for that oxygen, right into your diaphragm as you allow that oxygen to collect everything that you don't need for this next hour and a half, and breathe it out. Allow the universe to take care of it. This time when you breathe in, breathe right through your diaphragm, your hips, your thighs, your knees, your calves, your feet, and right through the floor, right to the earth, connecting with the energy left by the ancestors of the territory that you are on, as we each say thank you, lim lim, to those ancestors for holding the lands in such a sustainable way that you can be where you are and I can be where I am. And we hold our hands up. Our next breath, as we breathe in consciously, we connect with those ancestors that entered this life plane when we did. They came by way of our blood. They are there. They've been with us always. They're in our cells. They're in our DNA. So much wisdom, it lays in our blood. We merely need to activate it, acknowledge that it's there. And right now, we are acknowledging our ancestors as we connect our ancestors with the ancestral energy left in the territorial lands that we are on, fully connected ancestrally, held by the ancestors. Our next breath, we connect our minds with our hearts with our minds. One heart, one mind. Grandmothers, grandfathers, and spirits of the four directions, Squalin Chutin, Lim Lim. Thank you for each of the hearts that beat here. Help each one of us to stay focused and connected through this conversation that is so important to our people and into the future. 7 generations. What is done today, the difference will be seen. As we connect with our love, collect it together, and shine the warmth of love out to our brothers and sisters who are lost in addictions and violence. Help them to remember who they are and bring them back to the warmth of this circle. Collectively, we combine our love like a flashlight beam, and we bombard that love onto those that have power to stop the wars and stop the harms that are going on around the world. Help them to feel love. They need it the most. And in so doing, perhaps they can see that they have the power to change the direction. They have the power to be part of creating a world where we all have what we need and we can evolve as a species here on this earth. We can protect her, our mother, as she holds us. Watch over our families as we focus our energies here. Lim Lim, all of the people who are connecting in, all my relations. So yeah, my name is Sheila Nyman, and I am, amongst many things, a mother, grandmother, and a great-grandmother. My traditional name is Sal Uni At Kn. I am the first in 4 generations to carry that name. I'm with my 5 other siblings, was taken during the 60s. I've been back and connected with my peoples. I was lucky that I was about 9 when I was taken, so I was able to get to know my family before I was taken, and I made my way back. I had the journey that many of us go on, which involves many, many different things. And one of those things is I am a former director of Houses of Healing for Women in Vancouver's downtown east side. I worked from about 1994 to 2007 with sex trade workers, primarily Indigenous women, though it was all nation home. Many of the women who have become missing and or murdered are women who I have the honor of working directly with. This conversation is very close to my heart. The future for all of us is close to my heart. I am two-spirit. I right now am an elder in residence with the Feast Center, as well as the Institute of Gender Health with CIHR, and many other organizations. I do bits of mostly elder and traditional ceremonial support. So it's my honor to be here today and I think I'm the moderator. That's the name, the colonial name I'm being called today. So, Lim. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. So now I'm just going to ask the panel to introduce themselves, and then we'll start with questions. Monica, would you like to start?
Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yep, we can.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Monica Forster. I'm a two-spirit trans woman of color, so I'm Black Indigenous. I'm from Curve Lake, Ontario. My spirit name is Southern Eagle. I'm also a mother of a son and a mother to many people in the community, as I've been in the sex work community for 35 years, but working directly in the community for 25. I currently host an Indigenous sex work program that allows Indigenous people from all areas of our city to access, to stay connected to community and culture, but also, empower them to, work safely and making sure they have the right resources when doing that. A lot of my work is around advocacy, decriminalizing the laws. As we know, the laws really target our most marginalized and racialized people. So Indigenous people are on the high spectrum of being targeted by police and the justice system. And as we know, Indigenous people are the highest percentage incarcerated. So a lot of my work is just around, bringing a voice to what is so important to community and people outside of community of what sex work really is, and kind of debunking a lot of the myths around the violence that sex workers experience, but why this violence does occur. Yeah, so I'm really glad to be here, part of the panel, and miigwech, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Monica. Dominic, could you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dominic Mickelson. I am Treaty 6, Northern Alberta. I am located in Montreal, so Jojage, which is the traditional lands of the Ganya-Geha. I am Cree with Mohawk ancestry. I am also Two-Spirit. I have been involved with sex work off and on since my early 20s. I got my start actually as a minor. Completely different story, but I've been involved across Canada. I was also a victim of trafficking when I was in my 20s as well. And I have experience with Project Devote, Sage House in Winnipeg, Manitoba, as well as I have experience with Stella here in Montreal. I am an advocate for the decriminalization of sex work. I believe that it is a vital industry And I believe that we, as Indigenous peoples, have voices that need to be heard, have experiences that need to be recognized, and we have so much that we can contribute to these conversations. So I wanted to thank the Fee Center for inviting us and hosting this conversation. It is very much appreciated.
Thanks so much, Dominic. Naomi, could you introduce yourself as well?
Hi, everyone. My name is Naomi Sayers. I am a lawyer and I'm called to the bar in Ontario and Alberta. Um, but I have files all over Nova Scotia, British Columbia, Manitoba. And I practice primarily in criminal defense and mental health law. So if you ever are familiar with mental health holds in hospitals, I have a large practice relating to that. And I also do a lot of appeals or judicial reviews or what I would call like human rights intervention. So it may not always involve litigation, but it could involve like helping a group or an individual with letter writing or providing legal advice relating to, you know, their legal rights and the best options for them, or advising on risks, if you will. I also challenge a lot of government decisions. So sometimes I'm hired not by the client, but by the law firm to review and assess the likelihood of success, challenging government decisions. And one of the cases that I am most proud of that I was able to work on is called the Work Safe, Twerk Safe case. We sought a publication ban and a sealing order, which recognized the inherent stigma that may be present in doing certain kinds of jobs like sex work. And that was the first of its kind in Canada. Normally, in decisions that involve or court challenges that involve sex workers, the government or the opposing side will usually consent to anonymization, but at that time, there was no law that said and recognized that there's a risk if a sex worker brings forward litigation in their own name because of all sorts of impacts, which many of us are aware of, like CAS apprehension, losing jobs, losing future jobs, just the stereotyping that a sex worker may receive just by being out about it, losing housing, and the whole range of things outside of the criminal oversight. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm happy to be here and happy to contribute to the discussion. Thank you.
Miigwech to all of you. This is I'm really proud that we're able to do this, and really grateful that all of you agreed to be part of this panel. Sheila, I will pass it over to you. If you need anything, I'm here, right? But
Okay.
just so everyone knows as well, everyone sort of in attendance, the way the conversation series works is it's less a panel where like one person just asks a question and we go to the next, and a conversation, right? So if a question is asked, anyone on the panel, like if you'd like to kind of to have a bit of a conversation about it, to kind of move that forward, like do that, because that creates like a different sort of space of like of dialogue, right? And really this is about creating a space of dialogue. So yeah, and Sheila, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Lim. So I've been given some questions to ask, and how it's laid out is like the first is to Dominic. However, when Dominic is finished answering, any of you, if you have something, if something's activated in your mind, then you are welcome to add whatever that might be to the conversation. So, Dominic, as you know, we are an Indigenous STBBI Research Center. the Peace Center. And our primary goal is to teach Indigenous and allied researchers how to do Indigenous sexual health research in a good way. For those who are engaged in research with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis sex workers, what guidance would you give?
Thanks, Sheila. The first one would be listen. Speak to the participants and don't just speak at them, but speak with them. Be engaged in the conversation. Don't, it's having the ability. A lot of First Nations, Inuit, Métis people, we are our own governments. We were sovereign nations before colonialism. We could run our own lives. So when research is being done about us, it needs to be done with us. So engage the conversations with the people that you're polling. You can't just walk in and be like, this is how it's going to get done. No, you need to be like, okay, this is our end goal. How do you want to get there?
Anybody have anything to add to that? Monica.
Monica, I think you're on mute right now.
Yeah. Oh, hi. Yeah, so yeah, like you said, it's so important that community is a part of this conversation because most often community isn't. So we see a lot of people thinking what Indigenous people need and not, you know what I mean, consulting with them on what could help them and support them through that process. So within a lot of the work that I do, like I said, I run an Indigenous program, is allowing them to create a sharing circle where, you know what I mean, where they can have these conversations around STBBI and transmission or HIV, and talk about it, and talk about it in a way that's empowering people to be open about either their own experiences or the knowledge that they know, right? Because everyone, you know, understands knowledge differently, and our community, that's something I see within the sex work community, that there's not specific information for people that work in the sex industry, right? So, and there's also these assumptions, as someone that's been out with my sex work, with my own doctor, they make these assumptions that I need to be tested all the time, or you're at high risk. There are all these kind of ideas that sex workers are unsafe in the work that they do, right? So, it's really important to find a space that is, you know what I mean, a safe space for people to have that conversation through confidentiality. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of information being shared, and they're making sure that this information is actually used. Because most often, something I've seen in the past, when Indigenous folks share information, it's usually not published or used for consultation or in ways how we can change the healthcare system and how they approach Indigenous people around sexual health. So there's so many ways, I'm finding people that are actually, if they're non-Indigenous, that are supporting this sort of research, that they're really into really supporting people in the community. So, because like I said, most times, and I've seen that, these things get shelved and then nothing's ever done or nothing's ever published. And then, that's something that we don't see a lot of when we're going to mainstream hospitals or doctors or clinics, is, having information that really identifies with that is so important to really connect with that. You know what I mean? And that's something I see a lot of, is like when I go into a space, I don't see something that connects to me. So how am I supposed to actually learn or be educated on things that are so important for my overall well-being and health? So that's what it.
Naomi?
I don't I don't have anything to add. I agree with what everyone has been saying. Just like becoming a lawyer, it's definitely like I had to learn to navigate like the power imbalance, even though there's still some marginalization that I experience as an Indigenous woman, but there is still some power imbalance that is inherent to the lawyer-client relationship and to the community, and that mistrust towards lawyers and players in the system. So learning to listen but also respecting like my own mental health, like knowing that sometimes I may not be the best lawyer. And it's not a personal attack to anybody, but it is what it is. And sometimes there's just situations where I need to step away. So I think that's also just, at the individual and self-care level, to take care of us, we have to also, to take care of community, we also have to take care of ourselves. So that's the only thing I have to add.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I just what really stands out for me is like talk to people. The relationship in everything we do is most important. So developing that relationship. And as far as, STBBIs and the sex works trade, it is a trade. Welders, that's a trade. What do? They breathe in fumes. So it's open conversation about how to protect themselves or if something does affect them, because that's just the nature of their trade. So I think that just being transparent about this honest trade would be real good movement into the future. So the next question is directed at Monica first. And could you speak to the ways in which sex workers and those working in the area have supported the well-being of sex workers, and specifically the well-being of Indigenous sex workers?
Okay, thank you. Well, like I said, I came to the city when I was very young. As being a two-spirited person, I was in the streets of downtown Toronto, and there was many other two-spirited folks also that were homeless. And as sex work it was a profession that many people did for survival, you know what I mean, to live, to eat, to breathe. But it also was a place of knowledge keeping. It was a place where we shared information, where we shared how to stay safe. This is in the late 80s and early 90s at the height of the HIV crisis, the AIDS crisis. And many of my peers were HIV positive or Hep C or Hep B. And there wasn't a lot of what's going on now like there was back then. But I really, I have so much gratitude for my brothers and sisters that taught me how to stay safe, how to use condoms, how to use drugs safely. You know what I mean? Even though they might have been exposed because of lack of information on how to, you know what I mean, on safer sex. Back in the 80s, people or 70s weren't aware that HIV was something that was, you know what I mean, a big issue and was transmittable. So condoms are really only used for STIs, right? So a lot of people didn't really use them. So I was so grateful that my community kept me safe. And that's something we continuously do. We're always continuously keeping each other safe, because there are very far and few agencies that are willing to really listen to Indigenous sex workers, right? We're in a place with the trafficking that's been conflated with sex work, which has created this kind of environment that Indigenous sex workers feel unsafe to have those conversations with people in their communities, with agencies they access. We stick together and have those conversations. We're making sure that people are aware where they can, where they can get safe sex supplies and information. We've mobilized how, certain doctors that they can see without stigma. We put together actually the Happy Transsexual Hooker booklet that was actually created by Indigenous and racialized people that really speak to their lives and what they needed, right? And it was like I said earlier, there's not enough educational tools or information for sex workers to actually to, you know what I mean? And when we're looking at sex workers that are more marginalized, that are street active, or, you know what I mean, don't have access to internet, you know what I mean? So community driven, you know, programs like I work with or just engage with, it's so important with keeping people up to date on, you know, like, you know, the monkeypox and things that would affect them through their work. So, like I said, going back to that is community is very resilient. You know, one thing about us, we're really resilient. You know, there's so much that Indigenous people face, like racism, policing, you know, all these different things, plus the laws, right? So to actually, you know, find access to, you know, information or be able to engage with community around important things like this, you know what I mean, is very crucial in the livelihood of so many Indigenous folks that are in the sex industry, right? So and now, you know, Toronto is the epic of for a lot of Indigenous people, you know, to come here, you know what I mean, thinking this is land of opportunity, you know what I mean? And to find out that it's not, right? So you're still dealing with the same racism and stigma and discrimination, you know. So, you know, a lot of people rely on sex work, and it's really important we have these conversations and why Indigenous people are in sex work. And I understand we are the highest ratio when it comes to murdered and missing, and I'm not dismissing that. And it's so important to bring awareness to that. But we need to really make sure that Indigenous sex workers are part of that. You know what I mean? There are Indigenous sex workers in the industry, and we have to understand why they're in there. You know what I mean? Due to poverty, due to homelessness, due to not being able to get a job. And this is something I really transcend to a lot of agencies, Indigenous and non-Indigenous agencies, and how we can support Indigenous people in the sex industry. You know what I mean? It's not telling them to get out of it, it's to giving them opportunity and knowledge that when they want to transition out of sex work, that they have those opportunities to do that. But while they're in sex work, how can we create something tangible that keeps them safe? You know, and that is so important. What I try to communicate to people, it's not about exiting people, because we got to listen to them. We got to understand why they in this. You know, as much as we don't want to see our brothers and sisters, aunties, mothers, grandmothers, whoever, in this kind of work, we have to respect that they're doing it for a reason, and how can we best support them in their lives?
Yeah. Thank you, Monica. Anyone else have anything to add to that?
I actually wanted to say thank you to Monica for bringing up some really valid points. One of the things that, you know, I implemented when I was working in Winnipeg was I worked with Sage House to create the Anti-Violence Advisory Team, AVAT. That was created in 2010, and it is still going strong. We're talking 14 years later. There are still resources that are being shared. There are still bad date sheets that are being shared. It became a stepping stone for a lot of the people who were involved in the sex trade, especially two-spirit, trans, non-binary, the people that are the most marginalized, especially within the Indigenous communities as well. You know, and the other thing that I wanted to bring up was the fact that we need to start decolonializing those practices too. You know, a lot of our traditions and a lot of our culture is orally shared. What's the fastest way? Now we have, you know, the internet and everything else. The fastest way to disseminate information still is orally. We still have the ability to orally talk about these things and share the information person to person. You know, it's getting more outreach people on the streets that are informed and being like, okay, look, you know, when you're doing outreach, carry condoms, carry hand sanitizer, carry, you know, a clipboard with some bad date sheets, you know, be able to not target the people that are doing the work, but bring the community together in a safe environment so that we can share the information amongst ourselves and be able to keep each other accountable, to keep each other safe.
Yes. Thank you, Dominic. And then Naomi, have any thoughts pop up?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, I just want to.
Okay, it's could you speak to the ways in which sex workers and those working in the area have supported the well-being of sex workers and specifically Indigenous sex workers?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with what everyone else had said. And I know sometimes we have to like work within the systems that are present. But there's also opportunities to challenge those systems. One way that I found that has been really useful for me as a lawyer and like with lived experience is, sometimes the client or person impacted by an injustice, like they inherently know, like, that feeling where you're like, something bad is happening. I just don't feel right. Like, and we're always like, trust that intuition, trust that intuition. And that's true for like just injustices when it comes to laws and government actions. And so I usually just ask very pointed questions from the client. And I find that sometimes that is more helpful to assist with like the advocacy. Because sometimes, the client will be like, oh, I want to sue this person, I want to sue that person, I want to, I've been harassed. And it's like, okay, I hear you're saying those terms. It's not that I don't believe you, but I need you to understand. I need from you why you believed you were harassed. And then, that lays out like the opportunity for the client to tell their own story and their narrative. And I find that sometimes that's been helpful for clients just to like be affirmed. And then sometimes like a quick 10-minute call from a client is like, you know what, this just makes me feel better. And sometimes that's all they need is they just need an acknowledgement, and whether that 10-minute call, for them is their everything, but for me it's just like 10 minutes, right? So it can be just as mindful as changing like just the questions we ask, especially if we're working in community. So maybe just like assessing our processes, but also one like challenging government decisions and like state actions is I'm actually a big, why I hate rules. Like I'm like, you know, whatever rules exist, but at the same time, like when it comes to government and state action, I actually will deep dive into the rules and like laws and be like, okay, you want to say you're doing everything right? Well, here's why you did everything wrong, and here's why it's not in compliance with the law, or like your own rules that you made up, right? Like, hold them in strict compliance. Like they want to call us unreasonable, they want to call us crazy, they want to do that. Okay, great. You made the rules. Let's get let's hold you accountable then. So I just find taking that approach opens up like doors for like sometimes challenging legislation and law, and then but also like giving space for the client to tell their own story and just be affirmed.
Sheila, could I ask a follow-up question? Do you mind?
Sure.
So,
Yes.
I was just going to ask, like, I was thinking as you were all talking, like, those are, and there's a lot of wisdom in what you said, and it's good to see and we know that that support is happening on the ground, that support is like coming from community, that support is like being done in ways that are like really kind of attempting to meet the needs of like just safety and well-being and community, like all of that is implicit in that. But I did want to ask about like if there's specific needs for specific groups of like people engaged in sex work, right? So not thinking of sex workers more broadly, but is there, let's say for like two-spirit sex workers, for sex workers who are trans, like if we could speak to those, or for sex workers who are male, right? If we could speak to specific needs that those people engaged in sex work have, and how those are being sort of addressed by community. I know that was less a question than a phrase, but but if you can answer that.
Sorry, just can I, because my brain
Yes.
For sure, yeah.
doesn't work sometimes. So you're asking us how we're responding to specific concerns in specific communities or to
No,
specific
well,
groups?
I think so. The question that we just had right now was around how community and sex workers have come to kind of support like sex workers, right? And like through advocacy, through like creating programs by like community, but if there's specific needs for like specific groups of sex workers, right? So like for like let's say like trans sex workers, for male sex workers, for like two-spirit sex workers, like where have like different communities come together to support like those specific groups? Like, and if that's happening or if it's not happening enough, that's the question.
Monica.
Yeah, so well, as you know, I founded Trans Pride Toronto in 2004, which is made up of Indigenous and Black trans sex workers, specifically more women, but we also have trans men, and non-binary folks. And that is to speak to the needs of what we need as a community, our voices, to really break down some of the ideologies that people have around trans and two-spirited people, and why these communities are in the sex industry. And as you know, just recently, uh, the human rights laws were just passed for trans people a couple of years ago. So we really had no rights, right? And when we look at sex work in a whole, these are communities that are pretty well overlooked, right? So a lot of the laws, a lot of policies, they're really around women, right? Cisgendered women. So these laws don't really capture men or trans people within these laws and don't understand the dynamics of why communities are in the sex industry. And we all know why, right? Because they're marginalized, racialized. You know what I mean? We have a higher, if we look statistically, especially trans women of color, they're being murdered every day around the world. And two-spirited people, right? So we really gotta, our needs, the foundational needs are the same when it comes to why decriminalization of sex work is so important for all people. People that have HIV, people that don't have HIV, people that are, when it comes to race, class, and and gender, but trans people and men, or men that are in the sex industry, our needs are definitely different, right? There ain't a lot of supports that are specific for our communities. They are happening now. We're seeing a lot more inclusiveness, especially in Toronto. You know what I mean? That people are recognizing that these communities exist and they need more services. I'm not saying those services are the best services, but people, agencies are making attempts to be more inclusive. So, but it's up to me and many other trailblazers and advocates in the community to bring those voices forward and why we need change, and you know what I mean, in these different areas of the lives of men and trans two-spirited sex workers. I don't know if that answered your question. Sorry.
It does. Thank you, Monica.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it does. Dominic?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So one of the things that I was actually thinking about when you asked this question, William, was how education is definitely needed. I'll bring up a personal story. You know, I did sex work for quite a few years, and I am trans. I'm a two-spirit trans masculine, and it was a friend of mine who also does sex work. When when I came out as trans, he's like, "Well, you're going to be having sex with a lot of guys who are having sex with other guys." I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, have you thought about prep?" I, as a woman, I had no idea that prep even existed. It's not marketed towards women. It's not marketed towards trans people. It's marketed towards men. Um, there's been research now that has been done for trans men and for women that prep is effective. Prep, um, it's that's protection for STBBI infection. That's it's vital. So things like that are not traditionally marketed towards trans or non-binary or gender fluid, two-spirit, anybody that it's not that tiny targeted group. It needs to be like research needs to be done whether or not it's safe for females. Is it safe for trans men? You know, how does this interact with that kind of research needs to be done? And that is a huge piece because I realized that I can't treat sex like I did in my 20s before I came out as trans. I can't treat it like that now. Now that I'm closing in on 40, I can't treat it like I did, 20 years ago. It's not the same. And that evolution has to happen too. And that's one of the things that I'm finding in our communities is huge, is because that evolution is happening. It's just it has to reach more people.
Yeah. Thanks, Dominic. That's great. How about you, Naomi? You have anything to add to what William's questions?
Yeah, I think there could be maybe um I like the idea of like education and like making like the just I don't want to like misquote but I took it as like a supporting more marginalized groups within the marginalized group. Comments from Monica and Dominique. So um the one thing that I've been actually using and incorporating a lot in my law practice, which I actually use as a safety. And I remember I said this publicly on another panel involving missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Um, and I said, there's actually a lot of value in my cell phone and the way that I use it to keep me safe. And I know like it's counterintuitive to what I'm about to say is actually sometimes the tracking that's on my phone actually makes me feel safer because it tracks my location. If an incident happens to me, I'm able to actually pinpoint to where I was and I don't have to worry about like what I was doing that day. I know I can go back into my cell phone and I take a lot of photos actually. Sometimes the photos are just silly photos. And incidentally, in my own personal life, like I've been stalked and harassed by two different police forces now, Sault Ste. Marie and Toronto Police, and I've been able to backtrack and pinpoint where I was, what I was doing on a specific date, and gather that data and be like, there's no reason why such and such incident should have happened. Um, and it's actually been to my benefit. So there can be benefit to that as well, and especially around social media. I know a lot of people also don't like to use social media, but At the back end of social media, there's usually data that's collected, and some of the data that's collected is actually really useful in for my clients, like because it can actually provide alibis to some of the allegations against them, right down to the minute. And sometimes the allegations against them involve like someone create a social media account and then alleging it's that person, but like we've actually been able to say like that account has never been on that person's phone because the photo that's been produced is actually from a different phone. Because at the back end, what will be saved is actually the device that it's been uploaded from, whether it was uploaded directly from the device, whether it was taken from the app and uploaded to the app directly, and the actual identifying information. So it's actually there's as much as there should be education around like, all the physical health, there's actually maybe digital safety, right? And how to set it up so that it's benefiting you and your day to day.
Well, thanks, Naomi. I didn't know some of that. That's great to know. Yeah. Okay, are we ready to move on to the next one? It's for Naomi. Could you tell us about the current state of laws when it comes to sex work? How have these laws created or deepened insecurities for the safety of Indigenous sex workers?
Yeah, so I've actually been thinking about this question a lot because it's really complicated, and not complicated in the sense that like we make it complicated, but complicated in the sense that the state makes it complicated. Like the state is like, oh, we want to protect you, we want to save you, we want to ensure no violence happens to you. But at what cost to sex workers, Indigenous sex workers that occur? And I will always recall one of the incidences. So I sort of like left public facing sex work advocacy because I felt I was not being supported and ostracized for some of the things I was saying. And I recall I was sitting in a room with a number of other, and I'm trying to, be mindful of confidentiality. So I'll only quote what I said. But I remember being in a room with others, and somebody said, decriminalization will save sex workers' lives. And Cindy Gladue her trial had just been finished, publicized maybe about a few months prior, and protests were happening. And I remember feeling so enraged with that comment because if you were following the Cindy Gladue case, she had done everything that she was supposed to do to not be criminalized. So I get the power and use of a slogan like decriminalization will save lives because yes, that's true, but also at what expense to Indigenous sex workers will it come, right? So we have to be mindful of that. That's the context, right? So there are different decision makers and bodies that are impacted by laws in Canada. So you can have a human rights tribunal, you can have, privacy commissioner, you could have courts and judiciary, you can have police and other state agents, so like child welfare agents, anybody who's like making a decision that is enforcing a mandate, a public mandate, if you will. Also like doctors and hospitals. So the current state of sex work laws in Canada, um, in the criminal code itself is a mess. It's a hot mess. There are constitutional challenges. I think there was one at the recent Supreme Court of Canada recently. I don't know the case off the top of my head. I just did a hearing this morning. It started at 9 and I was up at 4:30, so I apologize. But I could maybe just get the name and send it out to you. But there's lots of challenges happening across Canada to these laws, like whether it's the drivers or the workers working together or people being charged with allegations of human trafficking, plus the new criminal code provisions. So that is not to say human trafficking doesn't exist. It's just a practice of the prosecution to what we would call overcharging, because they want one charge to stick, right? So from the prosecution perspective, it's better to lay as many charges as you can, but from the defense perspective, that shouldn't happen, right? Only the charges that you can receive a conviction on should stick. Like there should be no reason why you should be filing 10, 15 charges if they're all not going to stick, right? Um, so the way sex workers have been set up now, the government's saying that, oh, we're allowing it to occur, but there is still some oversight that is happening. And different types of sex workers are impacted by different types of regimes. So like just for example, in the Toronto area, you have to get a license to work in a strip club or a massage parlor. I don't believe off the top of my head you need a license to be an escort, but in Alberta, you do, right? So, and Saskatchewan, you do. So all these different little regimes complicate matters. But then you also have street-based and outdoor workers, or workers who may go from a location to location. So like um, just cruise a public location to find clients, right? So it may not be outdoor, but it's definitely not indoor, if you will, like in a specific dedicated spot, but it's also not on the street, if you will. So that's like the snapshot. There's is a one really important case that I actually noticed that the cited the work safe to work safe decision, and it involved a complaint against the police for not investigating a sexual assault complaint against a client in a strip club. I don't agree with the ultimate court outcome, but part of that useful case was that it actually allowed the sex work similarly to work safe, work safe. So if you're worried, or if you work with individuals who are worried about having their identity out there, really take up that case and see how it's being used to benefit interventions and enforcing rights, if you will. And I think that's my overview.
Thank you, Naomi. Anyone have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, so I would just like to say, so the new law C-36, the Exploited Persons Act law, is really basically the same as the old sex work laws. It's just kind of written differently. When the challenge and were struck down, where they said these laws were making sex workers unsafe, the Harper government imposed these other bills in the law to actually say that these would create more safe nets for sex workers. And it hasn't. Sex workers, they're saying sex workers can still work, but all the things to allow them to work safely is criminalized. So when we think around communicating for a price, or to actually making sure that we can say, yes, this is what I use in my sessions, like safe sex, you can't have those conversations. You can't be able to engage with other sex workers around the work that you do to stay safe, or what's going on in different areas of the work. You can't hire a manager to actually be able to book those calls, or to actually making sure you're getting legitimate calls and safe calls. You can have a bodyguard or someone looking over you in your home while you're working, right? So a lot of these things that are so important for sex workers to stay safe are actually being criminalized, right? So it actually isolates sex workers in a way of how to stay safe. You know what I mean? Like I said again, sex workers are very They're very, they mobilize with each other, you know what I mean? They engage. We have the Bad Day booklet that, you know, we distribute online and in person. This allows people to know all the bad dates that are happening within Toronto, you know what I mean? And within our groups, we have those conversations around how to stay safe. You know, these laws, to me, I feel when we were doing the Truth and Reconciliation and the Missing and Murdered, this was Harper's way of saying this is how we're going to keep Indigenous people safe. But when
Yeah.
we look at these laws, you know what I mean? When my peers are reporting violence or sexual abuse within the work they're doing, they're not being believed, right? So the only time they're taking anything serious is when someone's saying I'm being trafficked. You know, so it's all about numbers, something to reaffirm that, you know, trafficking does exist. And we're not saying it doesn't, but we got to look at what trafficking really looks like for different people. You know what I mean? Sometimes we traffic ourselves into things that we need and what we have to get. You know what I mean? We know a lot of migrant workers come here knowing that they're going to be doing sex work, but come in a way of being trafficked into the industry. You know, but like I said, I worked in some agencies that were running exit programs and looking, you know, because you know the government a couple of years ago gave millions of dollars to agencies that would help save trafficked victims of sex in the sex industry. So I was thinking, hey, this is something I want to do, right? This is something that I, you know, as someone that's pro sex work, you know, there are people that are being trafficked, and I would really love to support that. So when I was in that program, I never met one person being trafficked. I met a lot of sex workers that wanted to transition out of sex work. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, I was being actually given an ultimatum was like, well, we need traffic victims or you don't have a job. You know what I mean? And they wanted me to go into massage parlors, unsafe spaces to find traffic victims. You know, so, you know, a lot of it's been conflated. And like I said, I'm not saying it's not happening, but we really have to look now that like all sex workers are looked at as being trafficked. But you know, if sex workers ain't a part of this conversation and a part of creating laws that actually keep them safe, you're actually setting them up to be trafficked, right? So when we have laws that are enabling sex workers to work safely, you know, we have predators out there that are going to say, yeah, I can give you lots of money. Yeah, I can find you where you can get clients. And this is what sets our most marginalized, our most vulnerable people in our communities to being trafficked, right? So
Yeah.
that's why we feel that criminalization, you know, yes, not any law is really good for, come on, when we look at laws and we look at Indigenous folks, it's always hasn't been the best for us. You know what I mean? We're not
Yeah.
part of that equation, right? But I'm saying how decriminalization hopefully would help allowing us to shape laws that actually give us labor laws that we can work safely. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Give us, you know what I mean, things that we can, as sex workers in our society, can actually call the police and say, "I'm being assaulted," and they have to do something about it. You know, these things, you know, when women or trans or Indigenous folks go to police, they're most often disbelieved. You know what I mean? And nothing is ever being done. And you know who comes out on top is the clients. The client, oh, because they're middle class and they're married and they're the one holding all the power. There's nothing ever being done. So we really have to recognize, you know, when laws are created, you know what I mean, because they think racialized and marginalized people are most affected, you know, these laws are actually limiting our way of staying safe. So,
Yeah. Thanks, Monica.
no problem.
So in the spirit of being able to answer some of the Q&As that are coming in, I'll just ask the next question and then move to Q&A. Is that okay, Will? Yeah.
Yep. Actually, Sheila, so could I just ask one thing too? So one of the questions that we were going to ask was going to be about trafficking, and Monica, you just brought that up, and I think that is such an important point. Naomi, did you want to add anything to that? Because I know like you That was a question we were going to ask you, right? So, or did Monica
Did
cover,
ask it.
like, cover sort of where, see, what was the question that we had? The question that we had was, how have trafficking and sex work been conflated in the law? And how does this affect Indigenous sex workers, right? So we know they've been conflated, right? So, and does this sort of make like sex workers more vulnerable? Does it support them? Like, what's going on? Just
I don't know if you can
Yeah,
hear me.
that's our next question. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, because my internet is spotty, so like everyone freezes or I freeze and I don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
I think this just goes back to my comments about like the prosecution, like, you know, the overcharging and like this conflation. So maybe some benefit for education and training of police and crown attorneys, if you will, may benefit from this conflation. And like as like we all know that, you know, sometimes you can be like, yep, I'm doing this consensually, but then circumstances change and, you know, you need to uh there's a level of exploitation there. So I think it's an ongoing conversation, and the laws of consent are clear. Like, and maybe we might benefit from drawing an analogy from that um consent is ongoing and somebody can withdraw consent at any time, right? And similarly, right? Like sex work, somebody can engage in sex work, um, but the circumstances may change. And that consent based, you know, that analysis of exploitation where that um, certain choices are limited or taken away, perhaps we might be able to draw analogies from that consent law. And I don't mean to say consent law is clear, but what I mean is like the courts are clear. Like you can withdraw. Like if you are being if you are being assaulted in whatever manner you don't consent to, you can withdraw that consent at any time. Um, and I'm talking in the context of like sexual assault. So it's ongoing from beginning to end, and uh, it's an ongoing analysis.
I thank you, Naomi. I have I know somebody. She's not Indigenous, but there were two women. One was younger, underage, like 16. The other one's 20, not too much past the adult age, addicted, engaged in some sex work with a person. The young woman, the older young woman, is now doing 10 years for trafficking. The younger one, yet, you know, she, in fact, when I look at it, she's a victim as well because her own family put her out when she was 12. So when you said the overcharging, it just, I knew that, and because of these experiences, I'm seeing that some women are having, that made sense. So I appreciate that you brought that out like that. Lim Lim. Anybody else have something to add to the conflation of this trafficking law? That's the weird word, Will. Do you want to move to Q&A?
Oh, so I just wanted to, sorry, I just wanted to say that, you know, people that are being trafficked are not being taken seriously.
No.
You know what I mean? And people that are being accused for trafficking, You know what I mean? So we had some cases in Toronto where boyfriends were, you know, in the hotel room with their girlfriend, or other girlfriends were in the hotel with them to make sure that they were safe, and we were being charged for trafficking, right? So we got to really look at how that trafficking is keeping people unsafe, right? So then when we do have trafficked people that are being trafficked, they're not coming forward because of the discrimination they're facing. You know what I mean? So we have to really look at who are these laws really targeting and why are they targeting them. You know what I mean? If we think around missing and murdered women that are still being murdered today, why aren't
Yeah.
these laws helping them? You know what I mean? When we
Yes.
look at, the landfills that people are fighting endlessly to get in those landfills to find those women that were murdered. You know what I mean? Over the Fontaine case, the 13, 14-year-old girl where the police knew that she was at risk and vulnerable. You know what I mean? So, like, these things are happening, but we got to recognize how racism plays a role on who's important in our society. You know what I
Yes.
mean? And it's so easily to criminalize us and, you know what I mean, and sweep these things under the rug, you know what I mean? And then nothing is being done, right? So, like, um, and then once again, you know what I mean? This conflation really puts a lot of sex workers at risk. You know what I mean? Being trafficked, being thrown in jail, being put in detention. You know what I mean? And most often, they say this whole rescue piece, but what are they being? How are they being rescued? You know what I
Yes.
mean? So we really got
Yes.
to look at the process of how that looks when someone, if I were to go to police and say I'm being trafficked, first, am I going to be believed? Am I going to get any services out of that? Am I going to be able to access, like, anonymous housing or some sort of support? And most often these supports ain't happening. When we were doing that program and the government gave $3-4 million to these agencies, promising women or two-spirited or trans folks that they would get housing, employment, all these benefits. And then when it came down to it, they had nothing in place, right? So we got to recognize, you know what I mean? Like, as much as they say they want to help traffic victims or sex workers, that, you know what I mean? It's a way of just, filling the quota. You know what I mean? They need something to back up the evidence that trafficking is happening, and it is happening, but not to the extent of what they're saying it is, right? So we have to really
Exactly.
look at that and how we determine how these laws are playing out in different groups of people in their lives. So
Yes, absolutely. Okay, moving on to the questions. I'm gonna, Albert McLeod, your question. A lot of Indigenous missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls activists equate sex work with exploitation and trafficking. How do we resolve this? We
So
You
one
kind of touched on some of that, Monica. Go ahead. Was that you, Nate?
one strategy that I've used, yeah, one strategy that I've used is that I've actually stopped using sex work in any sort of writing or submissions that I do where it may go to a decision maker or somebody who is biased towards um, uh, sex work advocates. So, and that's not to say like I don't believe sex work is work, but it sort of takes away the power that the um, that may come with critiquing that perspective, right? To be like, oh, well, you believe sex work is work, and you just want to contribute to the rape of women. You just want to do this, that. Like, it takes that away. It's like, okay, let's take this away and let's just neutralize what you think the issue is because I think the issue is this. So I found that to be really beneficial. And I wanted to add, like for Bedford, we have to, and like human trafficking and exploitation is, we have to remember Bedford was very clear. And I've said this to Parliament, um, the Justice Committee, I said when they did the review of PSEPA, because the Department of Justice lawyers came in and said, oh, look at all the benefits our laws have. But Bedford was very clear. It said, the law is not concerned with who is receiving the benefit. If one person is impacted, the harm is established. And so I basically said to the Parliament, you have your Department of Justice counsel admitting that they're not following the law right here before you guys. So, and that's what I was talking about earlier, right? That rule compliance, compliance with the law. Okay, you want to do this? Let's play your little game. And let's use your rules and your law to say why you're wrong, right? So that's one way.
Yes. Dominic, what do you have to say to Albert's question?
I actually very much agree with Naomi. I think Naomi hit it on the head when she said that it's almost like we have to beat them at their own game. We have to. A lot of lawmakers, prosecution, lawyers, not saying you, Naomi, but but a lot of policymakers are incredibly sneaky, and they will twist things. And it is that twisting that puts us as sex workers in danger. It enables the trafficking because they can be like, well, you didn't speak up, you didn't say anything, so how are we supposed to know? Or, okay, you engage in sex work consensually, like Monica had brought up, having somebody in the room, that all of a sudden they're complicit in trafficking. That's an issue, because our safety, it's like our safety doesn't matter to them, but the numbers do. So if they can charge somebody with trafficking, all of a sudden they're validating, well, we need more anti-trafficking laws because look at the numbers. We're not numbers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks, Dominic.
What was that question again? Sorry.
It was from Albert.
Okay.
Oh,
Where did it go, Albert?
I just moved it into the answer tab. So if you click the answer tab,
Okay. Okay.
Do you see it? I can read it if you want.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So a lot of Indigenous MMIWG, so missing and murdered Indigenous women and girl activists, equate sex work with exploitation and trafficking. How do we resolve this?
Well, first of all, we got to recognize that Indigenous people have always been exploited.
Yeah.
Right. So, and every Indigenous woman, two-spirited person or girl is at risk of danger, violence, sexual violence. And you don't have to be a sex worker to experience that. But we also have to decolonize our sexual being of who we are. You know what I mean? We got to remember that we've been colonized to think a certain way, that we shouldn't be sexual beings. We shouldn't be able to make choices of our bodies. And you know what I mean? And so I totally agree. We need to keep our women safe. But, dismissing the lives of sex workers is not going to keep us safe. It's not going to keep anyone safe, right? We need to have those conversations. You know what I mean? We have to recognize why Indigenous women, trans, and two-spirited people and girls are in the sex industry. And those we got to start listening to. When I do, you know, a consultation within the community with really influential agencies that I don't want to mention, you know what I mean, with a Dr. Smiley at St. Mike's, and we get all this data to bring forward and how we can best support Indigenous sex workers, and then they tell us, oh, we're shelving it because this is not what they want to hear. You know what? We need to start listening to sex workers. This is how we're going to keep sex workers safe. You know what I mean? If we start pushing Indigenous sex workers away and dismissing them and telling them what they need, then we're going to see more people, not only Indigenous sex workers, but women and girls and two-spirit people going missing and being murdered, right? So, I get it. I get it. None of us want to see our people being murdered, and we see it all the time. We see the violence all the time. I live the violence every day. You know what I mean? But with not being able to engage in a community that really needs us, you know, that really needs to stop being isolated or being voiceless because people don't want to hear why we choose these things in our lives, you know what I mean, is really upsetting and really hurting the community in a whole. You know what I mean? And yes, it's hard to have those conversations. Yes, it's hard to know that people are doing things that you might not be in line with. But we have to respect people's lives and their choices. And if, as a community, we need to be able to empower our women wherever they are in their lives and how we can keep them safe and give them tools to stay safe and give them opportunity when they need it. And if we don't do that, we're going to see more missing and murdered Indigenous women, and not only in the sex industry, but all over, right? So it doesn't just affect Indigenous sex workers, it affects us all. So we need to, gather as community and really support each other and find ways and how we can amplify these voices to make change. And with criminalizing us and dismissing us and creating policies and laws that doesn't allow us to live safely, it's injustice. You know what I mean? So we really need to really think about why we feel this way, because it's not the sex work and this, it's how we're feeling inside while we're doing these things. And we get it. We get it. I see every day. I work with women every day that are dealing with systemic abuse, violence, sexual violence. You know what I mean? And a lot of those that they can't even have those conversations. They can't have to go to an Indigenous agency or their peers or their family, you know what I mean? Or people that just would listen and validate that these are happening and give them, ask them what do they need? You know what I mean? Let's start asking, what do Indigenous sex workers need to stay safe? And then we can start from there and building a better community.
Yes, absolutely. Like, make it more out there like everything else. Let's just talk about it. It's very real. It's been here.
And it's
and it's still
and it's
here.
going to stay here. It's going to always happen until we, as a community, are equal. You know what I mean? Is until women, our community is still living in poverty, still being homeless, still being discriminated and stigmatized. People do things because they need to, they need something or they need to, survive. You know what I mean? And, when I was 16, 17 doing sex work, I didn't think I would be a sex worker. It wasn't something I grew up with. I'm going to be a sex worker. I fell into that work because of who I was. You know what I mean? And I carried a lot of shame for many years. It went, beyond the things I was taught. You know what I mean? But then, I seen how sex work allowed me to live in a home, have food, transition, go back to college, be a voice for the community. You know what I mean? So, there are some positives that do come out of this work. And like you said, we got to start recognizing it's a form of work. And sometimes, people in our communities do it. And we need to be able to support them through that.
Exactly. So we have Freddie has a question here. How can we imagine a future where Indigenous sex workers are supported, respected, and empowered? And what steps can we take now to move toward that vision? I think some of what we've been saying touches on that, making it accepted. You know, it's part of being human.
Including them in policies, being part of the circle, being part of communities, recognizing, you know, that we have people in our community that do sex work and how we're going to keep them safe. You know what I mean? These are the conversations we need to have. You know, when we put positive within a community, we see better outcomes.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Naomi, have a thought on that?
I just echo what everybody else has been saying, and like, you know, just reflect on like what you do in your day to day might be helpful. Like how you ask questions, or paraphrasing your questions with a I believe you, but I need to ask you these questions. It's not that I don't believe you type thing.
Yeah.
That's what I do when I interact.
Dominic.
So it actually comes back to the words of one of my elders, where we sit together with a loving mind, or sorry, with an open mind and a loving heart. Wow. I
Yeah.
need caffeine today. It's I feel that how we move forward with the vision of Indigenous sex workers being supported, respected, and empowered, it is making sure that those voices are heard now, that we start seeing our policymakers sitting together with the sex workers in question, getting out of their ivory palaces, because I'm sorry, they sit in places where they are so far removed from the actual realities, and they make policies that make absolutely zero sense. So they need to be like us, boots on the ground, having those conversations with the people that they're making policies about. I admire when there is a politician or there is somebody who actually comes to, you know, a say an Indigenous organization, or comes to, you know, more than just a PR stunt, where they actually come to understand and listen when we speak. I've also found that one of the other ways that we can move forward that vision is by trusting. When an Indigenous sex worker says something, you don't look for the loopholes. You don't look for the inconsistencies. Yes, okay, sometimes those are there, but that shouldn't be the main thought. It should be, I hear what you're saying. I trust you. I'm open to hearing more. And
Yeah.
being that non-critical and just taking things at face value is the biggest thing. The other thing that we can do is actually start a network of grouping these organizations together. You know, connecting Sage House in Winnipeg with Stella here in Montreal, with the trans sex work that Monica is doing, having those connections instead of all these individual small little places doing what they can for their own city. That's how we're also going to fight trafficking, because if those organizations are all connected and being helped by being connected, then we can catch if someone's moving from Winnipeg to Calgary, or if somebody like, and they're going with an intimate partner. That was what happened to me. I started out in Saskatchewan, then I moved to Winnipeg, and then I moved to Calgary, and then Kelowna, and it just continued for 5 years, and nobody caught it because I was moving with an intimate partner. But in every single place, it wasn't her name that was going up on these websites with these agencies. It was mine. I got trafficked for 5 years and nobody knew because I didn't even have the words to say, hey, I'm being trafficked. I don't want to do this anymore. I was doing it to survive. And that's what I thought was, I'm doing this so that we can survive. We can pay rent. We can have bills. So if the agencies that I had been in contact with across Canada had been connected, that might have made a difference. Somebody might have caught that I was going from Kelowna back to Saskatchewan and still engaging in the same work. That's just my 2 cents.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good point. Awesome. Thanks, Dominic. There's just one more question, and maybe this is for you, Naomi. If the person's asking, is charging a person with many infractions a human rights abuse?
What's called prosecutorial discretion, and it's a very high threshold to challenge. So generally, no. But if you're successful in having all your charges withdrawn, dismissed, acquitted, you should talk to a civil rights lawyer to determine whether police were involved with infringing on your human rights, or whether the Crown engaged in actual bad faith misconduct. But it's a very high threshold to challenge.
So a human rights lawyer. Is that what you said?
No, I'm saying is charging a person with many infraction of human rights abuse. No, generally no, because it's part of prosecutorial discretion, meaning the Crown has broad discretion to do what it sees fit as a part of its prosecution. And if that includes laying new charges because new evidence has come forward, or withdrawing charges because the evidence has changed, or withdrawing all the charges because they don't meet their reasonable prospect of conviction, it's a very high threshold to meet. It's almost like you have to, I've been able to have charges dismissed, stayed, or individuals acquitted, but it's usually a very long process and attacking the state's evidence, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think we're at time, are we, Will?
We are, yeah, we're just past time. So
Okay.
yeah, so I did want actually to thank everyone who attended this panel, and really the three of you, the four of you, so the three of you and Sheila, our dear elder as well, for participating, for guiding us through this, for really like helping us think. I think this is such an important topic, and it's so important that I think that in an organization like the one that we are, that we sort of make spaces, I feel, for the voices of sex workers and those involved in this field to really like to be heard, because this is again one of the groups that tends to be sometimes like not heard, right? And in not being heard, positioned as more vulnerable. And all we can do is sort of try to work to kind of to mediate, to make it so people aren't sort of quite so vulnerable. So deep respect to all of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I will close. I'm going to say thank you to all of you out there who chimed in and those who will be chiming in, listening at another time. I'm going to close. I want to say this, though, that in 1969, as a 60 scoop kid, I was 15 years old. I ended up on the streets in Toronto, and it was a trans sex trade worker and friends that showed me how to survive. I wasn't a sex trade worker. However, I was a kid and they seen that and they taught me everything how to stay safe. So, you know, that's community. That is community. And we do need to be heard. I'm going to invite each of us to take that deep breath in. Breathe in that energy from the universe right into your diaphragm, gathering up anything you do not need to take from this conversation and breathe it out. Let the universe take care of it. And as you breathe in again, deeply breathe right through your body, this time your feet right to the earth and to the energy of the ancestors that have been holding us. And we say thank you, Lim Lim, to those ancestors, as well as that connection that they made with the ancestors that are in our blood, that walk with us. Thank you, Lim Lim, for holding us. As we take in our next breath, breathing in love, breathing out love to all who are connected here, and especially to those who are causing harm, who hurt others. Help them to feel love so that they can realize what they're doing. They have the power, they can stop it. Watch over all of us. Help us maintain our humanity in these turbulent times. All my relations. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Now,